It was Halloween in 2017 when my friend Jason convinced me to go on an overnight camping trip at the abandoned quarry outside of town. I had heard stories about the place, tales of disappearances, strange sounds, and mysterious lights people claimed to see. It was called the Devil's Pit, but I never believed in ghost stories. That all changed by the end of that night. Jason and I were both in our early 20s and always looking for adventure. When he suggested the trip, it seemed like a fun way to spend Halloween. We packed our gear, grabbed some snacks, and set out just before sundown. The quarry was about a 20-minute hike from the nearest road, surrounded by thick woods and huge limestone cliffs that made it feel like a different world. By the time we got there and set up camp, the sun had already gone down, and long shadows stretched over the rocky ground. We built a fire, cracked open a few beers, and laughed about all the scary stories people told about the place. Jason loved to poke fun at them, saying people were just too scared of their own imaginations. But as the night went on, something started to change. The wind picked up, howling through the trees and bouncing off the stone walls of the quarry, creating a creepy echo. The fire, which had been blazing, suddenly flickered as if the wind was smothering it. The strangest part was the feeling creeping up my spine, like someone was watching us. Jason noticed it too. He fell quiet, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. "Do you feel that?" he asked, his voice low and tense. I nodded, not sure how to explain the dread hanging over us. We tried to brush it off, blaming it on the spooky atmosphere and the stories we had laughed about earlier. But then we heard it, a low growling sound echoing from somewhere in the quarry. It was deep, almost like an animal, but nothing I had ever heard before. Panic shot through us. Jason stood up, scanning the dark with his flashlight, but the beam didn't reach far enough to show anything. "Probably just a wild animal," he said, but I could see he didn't believe it. Then the fire sputtered and went out, leaving us in complete darkness. The only light came from Jason's flashlight, and even that seemed dim. We fumbled to relight the fire, our hands shaking, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig making us freeze. Suddenly we saw it, a pair of glowing red eyes in the distance, hovering just above the ground. They blinked slowly, then moved toward us, disappearing and reappearing as they slipped through the rocks. My heart raced as Jason grabbed his phone to record it. He always wanted to capture everything. But as soon as he pointed the phone at the eyes, they vanished. "Did you get it?" I asked, my voice shaking. "No," Jason replied, breathless. "It's like it just disappeared." We sat there, tense and silent, hoping whatever it was had left. But the growling returned, louder this time, coming from all around us. It felt like we were surrounded. Panic set in. We grabbed our stuff and ran, leaving the campsite behind. Every few seconds I heard something behind us, heavy footsteps, branches snapping, and that unmistakable growl getting closer. We didn't stop running until we reached the road. When we finally slowed down, gasping for breath, we turned back. There was nothing. No glowing eyes, no movement, just silence. Jason and I never told anyone what happened that night. We didn't want to be laughed at for believing in ghost stories, but deep down I knew what we saw was real. The Devil's Pit wasn't just a place of old legends. It was something much worse, something we barely escaped. Since that night, I've stayed far away from the quarry, because whatever was out there watching us is still there, and next time, it might not let us go. It was Halloween in 2019, and I was at my cousin Jake's house in a small, quiet town. The place felt eerie, especially at night, surrounded by dark woods that seemed endless. Jake had been telling me about a local legend called the Watcher. He said that anyone walking through the woods at midnight might see a strange figure watching from the shadows, but you could never see it clearly. I didn't really believe in ghosts or legends, but the way Jake told the story gave me chills. He sounded so serious, as if he had seen something himself. That night, he dared me to go into the woods and see for myself. I couldn't back down from a dare, especially on Halloween, so I agreed. We grabbed a flashlight and headed into the woods around 11:30 p.m., planning to be deep inside by midnight. As we walked, the wind howled through the trees, making them creak and crack like old bones. We walked for what felt like hours, but it was only about 20 minutes. The deeper we went, the more uneasy I felt. The trees seemed to close in on us, and the darkness felt alive. I could hear Jake laughing at me, calling me paranoid, but I noticed he was starting to feel uneasy too. As midnight approached, we stopped in a clearing bathed in pale moonlight. It was unnaturally quiet. No wind, no rustling leaves, just silence. I turned to say something to Jake, but before I could, his eyes went wide and his face lost all color. "Do you see that?" he whispered, pointing toward the edge of the clearing. I followed his gaze and saw it, a dark figure standing just at the tree's edge. It was tall, impossibly tall, and completely still. My stomach dropped and fear washed over me like ice water. For a moment I thought it was just a shadow, but then it moved. Just a little. It shifted slightly, and I knew it was watching us. Jake grabbed my arm tightly, and we both stood frozen, too scared to move or even breathe. Then the figure stepped forward into the moonlight. It didn't make a sound, but the way it moved felt wrong, almost like it was gliding. Its face, or where a face should be, was just a blank void of darkness. "We need to leave now," Jake whispered. Without a word, we turned and ran back through the woods, not caring where we were going as long as it was away from that thing. The branches whipped at our faces, but we didn't stop. I could hear soft footsteps behind us, like it was following us, but it never got too close. When we finally burst out of the woods and into the clearing near Jake's house, we stopped to look back. The figure was gone. The woods were quiet again and everything felt normal, but the fear lingered. We stumbled back into the house, shaken and out of breath. Jake's parents were asleep, so we quietly agreed not to talk about what we saw that night. But I'll never forget the terror of that moment, realizing that some legends might be true. To this day, I avoid the woods on Halloween, because somewhere out there in the dark, the watcher is still waiting. It was Halloween night, and kids in costumes were everywhere. But I was stuck working the closing shift at the diner. I wasn't too upset about it. Halloween has never been my favorite. There was always something off about it, like the night held more than just candy and fun. I couldn't shake the feeling that the line between our world and something else was thinner that night. By the time I locked up the diner, it was well past midnight. The streets were eerily quiet, with most trick-or-treaters gone and only a few porch lights flickering. As I started walking home, I noticed fog rolling in. It wasn't the usual mist. It was thick and dense, almost like it was alive and moving. The fog surrounded me quickly, and within minutes, I could barely see a few feet ahead. I picked up my pace, feeling a strange weight settle over me, like I wasn't alone anymore. My heart raced, and I tried to focus on my footsteps, but soon I heard it, another set of footsteps, matching mine. They were faint at first, but gradually grew louder. I stopped and turned around. Nothing. No one was there. I laughed nervously, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But as I started walking again, the footsteps began once more, this time closer. "Hello?" I called out, hoping it was just a late-night jogger or someone playing a prank. But all I heard was the wind whispering through the trees. I tried to shake it off and kept walking, but my hands began to tremble. Then I saw it. Ahead of me, barely visible through the fog, stood a figure. It was tall and motionless, cloaked in shadow. It didn't look like a person. It was too still, too unnatural. The figure turned its head slowly, as if it knew I was watching. For a split second, I felt its gaze on me, but I couldn't see any eyes. Panic shot through me, and I ran. The footsteps behind me grew faster, heavier. No matter how fast I ran, they stayed right behind me. I felt a chill down my spine, the air growing colder with every step. I glanced back once and my heart dropped. There were more figures now, maybe 5 or 6, all cloaked in fog, moving in sync with me. I sprinted down side streets, weaving through alleyways, desperate to lose them, but they followed without fail. I could hear their ragged breathing and faint whispers I couldn't understand. The fog thickened, wrapping around me like a living thing. Finally, I saw my apartment building up ahead. I ran faster than I ever thought I could, my lungs burning, my legs aching. As I reached the door, I fumbled with my keys, terrified the figures were right behind me. I felt their presence looming closer. I burst through the door, slamming it shut. For a moment, there was silence. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed my ear to the door, listening for the footsteps. Nothing. Had I imagined it? Was it some Halloween prank? I leaned against the door, trying to calm down, but something felt wrong. The air inside my apartment was freezing. Slowly, I turned around, my heart pounding. The fog had seeped in, swirling around the furniture, and there, in the center of my living room, stood the figures, still, silent, watching me. I backed against the door, fumbling for the lock, but I knew it was too late. They were inside now, and there was no escaping them. The last thing I heard before everything went black was a whisper, barely audible, but clear enough to send a shiver down my spine. You can't run from what's already inside. It was Halloween night, and I was house sitting for my friend Jess in a quiet neighborhood. The house was cozy, but it felt a bit off. From the moment I got there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Not from outside, but from the house itself. The air felt heavy and strange. Jess had warned me about weird things happening in the house, but I laughed it off. Old houses make noises, I said. But now, sitting alone in the dim living room, the silence felt suffocating. Even the fridge wasn't humming, and the usual sounds from outside were gone, leaving me with just the sound of my own breathing. As the night went on, I decided to explore a little to pass the time. The house was big, and Jess had told me to stay away from the basement because the lights didn't work right. I was already feeling uneasy, so I stayed upstairs. I flipped through the TV channels, but nothing caught my attention. The hours dragged on, and just before midnight, I heard a soft thud from upstairs. I froze. The sound was clear, like something had been dropped. My heart raced as I stood still, listening closely. Then it came again, a slow, deliberate creak, like someone shifting on the floorboards. It couldn't be Jess. She was miles away at a Halloween party. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, carefully making my way up the stairs. The creaking stopped as soon as I stepped into the hallway. Each bedroom door was slightly open, just like when I arrived. I peeked into each room, holding my breath, but nothing seemed out of place. Until I reached the guest bedroom. The room was colder than the rest of the house, and the air felt heavy. The closet door, which had been closed earlier, was now wide open. I stared at it, feeling a chill run down my spine. Slowly, I approached it, feeling the temperature drop with every step. Inside the closet, I spotted a small, dusty box tucked away in the corner. It looked old, with faded markings on the lid that I couldn't read. Against my better judgment, I reached for it, pulled it out, and set it on the bed. As soon as I touched the lid, the lights flickered, and the room felt different. I tried to calm myself as I lifted the lid, revealing a collection of old black and white photos. They were faded, but something about them made me uneasy. Each photo showed a family, parents and children, but their eyes were too dark and their smiles were too wide. They all seemed to be staring at me. A chill ran down my spine as I flipped through the images. In the last photo, my blood ran cold. It showed the very room I was standing in, the guest bedroom, the bed, the open closet. But this time, there was a figure in the doorway. It was blurry and shadowy, but I could see it was there. I dropped the photo and stumbled back, my heart racing. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from downstairs, like the front door had been flung open. I rushed out of the room, nearly losing my balance as I ran down the stairs, calling out for help. The door was wide open, just as I had feared, but there was no one outside. The street was empty, shrouded in thick fog. I slammed the door shut and locked it, backing away slowly. My mind raced. Had someone broken in? Was I imagining everything? Then I felt it, a cold breath on the back of my neck. I turned around, terrified of what I might see. But there was no one there, just the empty living room, dimly lit by the flickering TV. The house was completely silent again, except for my shaky breaths. Without thinking twice, I grabbed my things and bolted out of the house. I didn't care about Jess's warning or that it was the middle of the night. I wasn't staying there another minute. The next day, I called Jess to tell her what happened. She listened quietly, then sighed, her voice heavy. "I should have told you," she said. "That house has been in my family for generations. Every year on Halloween, something happens, something comes back." I didn't need to ask what she meant. I already knew. That's why I avoid Halloween night at all costs. Because sometimes the things that haunt us aren't just in our heads. Sometimes they're very real. Halloween night has always been my favorite time of year. The air feels different, filled with mystery and excitement. But this year, something felt wrong. My friends dared me to explore an old mansion on the edge of town. People said it came alive every Halloween, trapping anyone who was foolish enough to enter. I didn't believe in the stories, but I loved a good thrill. With a flashlight and my phone, I set off alone, ready to record everything. The mansion loomed ahead, covered in vines and with broken windows that looked like empty eyes watching me. The door creaked open as if it had been waiting for me. When I stepped inside, the smell of decay hit me. Dust covered everything, furniture, walls, and even the old chandelier hanging from the ceiling like a ghost of what it used to be. I moved cautiously, each step echoing in the silence. As I wandered through the rooms, I found nothing unusual. It was just an old ruin, falling apart with time. Then I reached the staircase. Something felt off as I approached. My flashlight flickered, and I heard a soft humming sound. It was faint, like a distant voice. I hesitated, but my curiosity won. I climbed the stairs, the wooden steps creaking beneath my feet. At the top, a long hallway stretched out, with doors on either side. The humming grew louder, coming from a room at the end. My heart raced. I crept toward the sound, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. But when I got to the door, I realized it was a lullaby, a slow, creepy tune that made my skin crawl. I pushed the door open. Inside, a small, dusty rocking chair moved on its own, creaking with the lullaby. There was no one there, just the chair rocking back and forth. I took a step closer and shined my flashlight around the room. Old children's toys were scattered on the floor, dolls with missing eyes, broken trains, and stuffed animals that looked worn out. Then the chair stopped. The lullaby cut off suddenly, and the room fell into a strange silence. I backed away, every instinct telling me to leave. But as I turned to run, the door slammed shut behind me with a loud bang. Panic shot through me as I pulled on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. I pounded on the door, shouting for help. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I scrambled to get it out. The screen lit up, but instead of messages from my friends, there was just one notification: welcome home. Suddenly, I felt something behind me. Cold breath brushed my neck, and I froze, too scared to turn around. The lullaby started again, faint but growing louder, filling the room. The toys on the floor began to move, twitching as if something unseen was playing with them. I was not alone. With every bit of courage I had left, I turned around, flashlight raised. But there was nothing there. No figure, no face, just the heavy darkness and the toys moving on their own. Then, from the corner of the room, I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes watched me. They blinked, and in that moment I realized this wasn't just a haunted house. It was a trap. Something ancient and evil had claimed this place, and now it had me. I don't remember how I got out. Suddenly I was outside, gasping for air, the mansion behind me dark and lifeless again. My phone buzzed again with that same notification. Welcome home. I ran. I never looked back, but now every Halloween I hear that lullaby. No matter where I am, it follows me. Deep down, I know that one day I won't be able to escape. The house wants me back, and when it comes for me again, I hope I'll be ready. It was Halloween night, and the town was buzzing with excitement. This year felt different for me. I had just moved into an old house on the edge of town, the kind with creaky floors and rattling windows that shook even when there was no wind. The locals warned me it was haunted, but I brushed it off as just small-town gossip. As the evening wore on, I decided to stay in and avoid the craziness of trick-or-treaters. I settled on the couch with a bowl of popcorn, a horror movie playing on the TV. Just as I started getting into it, the lights flickered. I rolled my eyes. Of course, on Halloween, the power would act up. I tried to ignore it and kept watching, but a strange feeling crept over me, like I wasn't alone. I looked around the room, trying to shake off the feeling, but everything was quiet, too quiet. Then I heard it, a faint knock at the front door. At first, I thought it was a late trick-or-treater, but when I opened the door, no one was there. The street was empty, leaves rustling in the cool breeze. I stepped out onto the porch, peering down the driveway, but there was nothing. I shrugged and shut the door, turning back inside. That's when I noticed the footprints. Muddy, wet prints led from the door to the center of the living room. My heart raced. I hadn't seen anyone, but clearly someone or something had been inside. I followed the trail, my breath quickening as the print stopped right before the couch. Suddenly, the TV turned off, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for the light switch, my hands shaking. The air felt thick, like something was watching me. Finally, I found the switch and flipped it on, only to scream at what I saw. A shadowy figure stood at the far end of the room, its face hidden in the dark. It wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at me. I couldn't tell if it was real or just a trick of the light, but I was frozen in place. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Then it moved. Slowly, the figure took a step forward. I stumbled back, my legs barely working as I tried to escape. It took another step and another until it was just feet away from me. I shut my eyes, bracing for whatever was coming, but nothing happened. When I opened my eyes, the figure was gone. I stood there, heart pounding, the room silent again. Had I imagined it? Was it a Halloween prank? I didn't know what to think, but I didn't want to stick around to find out. I grabbed my keys and bolted out the door, not daring to look back at the house. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and there, standing on the porch, was the figure, watching me leave. I never went back to that house. A few days later, I left town, never telling anyone what I saw. But every Halloween, I can't shake the feeling that something, or someone, is still watching me, waiting for me to return. It was a chilly Halloween evening, and I reluctantly agreed to go to a party at a friend's house in the old part of town. They lived in a big mansion that everyone said was haunted. When I arrived, the place was buzzing with laughter and music. But a shiver ran down my spine as I noticed the peeling wallpaper and flickering candles. After a while, my curiosity got the best of me. I wandered away from the party and found the basement door. It creaked loudly as I opened it, revealing a dim staircase leading down into darkness. Against my better judgment, I went down, each step echoing in the eerie silence. The basement was cold and damp, filled with cobwebs and shadows. I turned on my phone's flashlight, lighting up old dusty furniture and a mirror that looked surprisingly clean compared to everything else. As I approached the mirror, I felt a sudden chill in the air, and my reflection seemed to waver. Suddenly, the lights flickered above me, and I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut. Panic surged through me as I pounded on it, calling for help. My voice echoed, but the laughter from the party faded away. Then I saw something in the mirror, a dark figure standing behind me, barely visible. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing there. My breath quickened, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I rushed back to the mirror, and this time the figure was clearer, a woman in an old-fashioned dress, her eyes hollow and pleading. I backed away slowly, trying to calm my racing heart, when she whispered, "Help me." The desperation in her voice sent chills down my spine. I felt compelled to reach out, but the mirror felt icy under my fingers. As I touched it, the world around me distorted, and I gasped as I was pulled into the mirror. Everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in a ghostly version of the basement, filled with mist and flickering shadows. The woman stood before me, more solid now, her expression a mix of fear and hope. "Find my grave," she pleaded. "Set me free." Suddenly, I was back in the real basement, gasping for breath. The door swung open, and my friends rushed down, worried about me. They had heard my screams. I told them what happened, my voice trembling. At first, they thought I was joking, but I insisted we search for the woman's grave. They agreed to help, driven by curiosity. The next day, we looked through old cemetery records, piecing together clues about the mansion's history. We found out the woman had lived there in the 1800s and tragically died on Halloween night. Her spirit was said to roam the mansion searching for closure. That Halloween night, we gathered our courage and went back to the mansion. Armed with flashlights and determination, we made our way to the cemetery. Finally, we found her grave, overgrown and neglected, the name barely readable. We cleaned the headstone, whispering apologies for the neglect, and laid flowers at her resting place. As we stood in silence, I felt a breeze pass through, and the air seemed to lighten. I sensed her presence, a soft gratitude wrapping around us. That Halloween became a turning point for me. I realized that some stories are worth telling, and some spirits are worth freeing. Every year since, I returned to the cemetery, lighting a candle at her grave to make sure she is never forgotten again. As Halloween got closer, my friends and I decided to explore Blackwood Forest, famous for its creepy legends and ghost stories. We arrived at dusk, with the sun barely shining through the thick trees. The air felt heavy, filled with the smell of damp earth. We gathered at an old stone path that locals said led to a haunted clearing. Armed with flashlights and our sense of adventure, we stepped into the forest, trying to laugh and hide our growing unease. As we went deeper, the sounds from outside faded away, replaced by rustling leaves and distant whispers. Suddenly, my friend Jake stopped, his eyes wide with fear. He pointed ahead, and we squinted into the dark. A flickering light danced among the trees. Curious, we crept closer, and the light led us to a rundown cabin we hadn't seen before. Its windows were broken, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. Against my better judgment, I suggested we check it out. When we entered, the floorboards creaked loudly beneath us. Inside, old furniture was covered with dusty sheets, and cobwebs hung everywhere. The air felt heavy, like we were intruding on something forgotten. Then a cold breeze swept through the cabin, making our flashlights go out. Panic hit us as we fumbled to turn them back on. Just as our lights flickered back to life, we heard a soft sobbing sound echoing in the darkness. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. We exchanged nervous glances, but decided to follow the sound. We went down a narrow hallway that led to a small room at the back. As we entered, the sobbing grew louder, full of sorrow and despair. In the corner stood a figure in white, her face hidden under long, tangled hair. A chill crawled up my spine, and I instinctively took a step back. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned to us, her hollow eyes full of sadness. "Help me find peace," she pleaded, her voice echoing in the room. "I am trapped here, lost in this world." Fear gripped my heart, but compassion rose within me. "What do you need us to do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Break the curse," she whispered. "Find the necklace buried in the forest. It holds my spirit captive." Just as we started to understand her words, the room began to swirl, and the walls shook. We were thrown back into the main area of the cabin, confused but determined. We promised each other we would find the necklace. After searching frantically through the forest, we came across a clearing that felt strangely familiar. In the center, we saw a large stone, and as we approached, I noticed something glimmering under the leaves. We dug quickly and uncovered a beautiful silver necklace with a blue stone. As I held it up, a warm feeling surrounded me, and the forest seemed to sigh in relief. When we returned to the cabin, the spirit was waiting, her expression changing from despair to gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered as she took the necklace from my hands. In an instant, a soft light filled the room, and she began to fade, a peaceful smile on her face. "I'm free at last." The cabin seemed to exhale, and we felt the heavy weight lift from the air. That night, we left the forest with lighter hearts, but we were forever changed by what happened. Every Halloween since, we returned to the forest, not for thrills but to remember the spirit we set free. As Halloween approached, I felt restless and drawn to the old cemetery at the edge of town. I had heard stories about its haunted history, filled with restless spirits and strange happenings. Despite my friends warning me not to go, I decided to explore the cemetery one chilly evening. The sun was setting when I arrived, casting long shadows among the tombstones. I felt uneasy, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I wandered along the narrow paths, reading the worn names on the gravestones, each telling a story of a life that once was. When I reached the oldest section, I noticed a grave that stood out. It had a crumbling stone and wilted flowers. The name read Elizabeth Hawthorne, and she had passed away over a century ago. I felt compelled to kneel beside her grave, and as I did, a cold gust of wind rushed through the cemetery, rustling the leaves and sending chills down my spine. Suddenly, I heard soft sobbing. I looked around, trying to find the source, but the cemetery was silent except for the wind. I stood up, feeling an urge to move toward a nearby willow tree. Its branches swayed even though the air was still. As I got closer, the sobbing grew louder and more desperate. I felt a chill run through me, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. Peeking around the tree, I saw a figure shrouded in shadows. It was a woman, her long hair flowing down her back, hiding her face. She cried quietly, her sobs echoing in the night. "Please," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Help me." "Help you?" I repeated, unsure of what to do. "What do you need?" She lifted her head slightly, revealing sad eyes that seemed to look right through me. "I'm trapped between worlds. You need to find my locket. It holds my essence. Without it, I cannot rest." A chill went through me. "Where is it?" I asked, feeling a mix of fear and compassion. "In the hollow of the old oak tree." She pointed toward a massive tree at the edge of the cemetery. "But be careful. The guardian of the locket does not like intruders." My heart raced as I looked back at the old oak, its twisted branches reaching into the night sky. "I'll get it," I promised, though doubt gnawed at me. I nodded and headed toward the tree, my breath quickening. As I got closer, the air felt heavy. The leaves rustled ominously, and I thought I heard whispers in the wind. My hands shook as I reached the base of the tree, searching for the hollow the spirit had mentioned. Finally, I spotted a small, dark opening among the roots. Reaching inside, I felt something cool and metallic. I grasped a delicate locket, beautifully designed and surprisingly warm to the touch. Just as I pulled it out, a low growl echoed from the shadows behind me. My heart raced, and I turned slowly to see the source of the sound. A large, shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its eyes glowing like embers. Panic surged through me as I stepped back, clutching the locket tightly. "I mean no harm," I shouted, my voice trembling. The creature moved closer, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. "Please, I just want to help her," I pleaded, holding up the locket. The figure paused, its growl fading to a low rumble. We stood in silence for a moment, the tension thick in the air. Then, surprisingly, the shadowy figure stepped back, its eyes dimming as if considering my words. I took a cautious step forward, extending the locket toward the woman's spirit. "I found it!" I exclaimed. As the locket hovered between us, the spirit emerged from the shadows, her face glowing with hope. "Thank you," she cried, reaching for the locket. The guardian, still watching, slowly retreated into the darkness, and the air around us felt lighter. The spirit took the locket in her hands, a warm glow enveloping her as she began to fade. "You freed me," she said, her voice soothing. "Thank you for your courage. I can finally rest." With that, she vanished, leaving behind a gentle breeze that whispered through the trees. The cemetery felt different now, lighter somehow. I stood in the moonlight, the locket still warm in my palm, knowing I had experienced something extraordinary. As I made my way out of the cemetery, the weight of the night lifted, replaced by a sense of peace. I knew I would never forget Elizabeth Hawthorne, or the courage it took to help her find her way home. From that night on, Halloween became more than just a spooky holiday. It turned into a time to honor those who had passed, reminding us that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is help someone find their peace. Growing up in a small town surrounded by thick forests, I often heard stories about the Whispering Woods. As kids, we were warned not to go too deep into the woods, especially around Halloween, when the line between the living and the dead was said to be thin. The legends told of a long-lost village hidden in the trees, filled with spirits looking for peace. One chilly Halloween night, my friends and I decided to test the old stories. Fueled by teenage bravado and a thirst for adventure, we planned a trip to the Whispering Woods. We grabbed flashlights, snacks, and mixed feelings of excitement and fear as we headed out at dusk, the last rays of sunlight shining through the trees. When we entered the forest, an eerie silence surrounded us. The air felt electric, and a chill ran down my spine. We walked deeper into the woods, the path twisting between tall oaks and tangled branches. With every step, the shadows grew longer, and night began to settle in. Then we started to hear whispers. At first, they were soft, like a gentle breeze through the leaves, but soon they grew louder, echoing around us. "Did you hear that?" Jenna whispered, her eyes wide with fear. We all stopped, trying to catch the faint voices drifting in the air. They seemed to call us deeper into the woods. Even though we were scared, our curiosity pushed us on. The voices became clearer, forming words we couldn't quite understand. I felt a pull, as if the woods were alive, guiding us towards something hidden. After what felt like hours, we stumbled into a moonlit clearing. In the middle stood an old cabin, its wooden walls rotting and covered in vines. The whispers grew stronger, swirling around us like a storm. We exchanged nervous glances but felt drawn to the cabin. As we got closer, the door creaked open, showing a dark interior. Gathering our courage, we entered, shining our flashlights into the gloom. Dust floated in the air and the smell of decay hit us. The cabin was filled with old, forgotten things: a rocking chair, a cracked mirror, and a fireplace full of ashes. On a shaky table lay a dusty journal. I reached for it, my fingers trembling, as I opened the fragile pages. The handwriting was shaky, filled with desperate entries from someone named Mary, who wrote about the spirits in the woods and her search for peace. The last entry sent chills down my spine. I hear them calling my name. They want me to join them. Suddenly, a cold wind rushed through the cabin, snuffing out our flashlights and plunging us into darkness. Panic surged as we fumbled for our phones, their screens casting a weak light. The whispers grew louder, turning into a chorus of voices swirling around us. "Leave this place," they shouted, echoing in a haunting cry. "You do not belong here." My heart raced as I grabbed Jenna's hand, and we all ran for the door. The whispers turned into wails, a mournful sound that filled the cabin, as if the spirits were desperate to keep us there. Just as we reached the door, I felt a cold hand brush against my shoulder, freezing me in place. I turned, but there was nothing there. "Go, now!" someone shouted, and instinct kicked in. We bolted into the night, the whispers chasing us, begging us to come back. The woods felt alive, branches reaching out like skeletal fingers as we sprinted toward the path we had come from. When we finally broke free from the trees, the whispers faded, leaving only silence behind. We stumbled back into town, breathless and shaken, the thrill of adventure replaced by a heavy sense of dread. The whispering woods had kept their secrets, and we learned firsthand the dangers of disturbing the spirits that lingered there. That Halloween night haunted me for years. I often wondered about Mary and the spirits whispering in the woods. Were they lost souls, forever seeking peace? Or were they guardians of the forest, protecting their secrets from the living? I promised myself never to return, but the tales of the whispering woods continued to echo in my mind, a chilling reminder of that night and the spirits we had encountered. Every Halloween, stories about Black Hollow Manor scared all the kids in our town. The big old mansion sat on a hill, looking down at us like it was hiding secrets. It had been empty for many years, its walls crumbling and covered in vines. People whispered about ghosts and strange noises coming from the manor, making our imaginations run wild with fear and curiosity. This year, my friends and I, now teenagers looking for some excitement, decided to check out the manor. With flashlights and a sense of adventure, we planned our trip for Halloween night. Dressed in funny costumes, we laughed as we walked up to the creepy house. When we got to the front door, it creaked open like it was welcoming us. A chill ran down my back, but I couldn't resist. The foyer was dark and dusty, and the smell of mildew filled the air. I turned on my flashlight and saw the grand staircase with faded portraits that seemed to watch us. "Let's split up and explore," Jenna suggested, her voice echoing in the empty halls. I felt a little nervous, but everyone agreed, so we scattered into the manor. I found myself in what looked like a library. Dusty books lined the shelves, and the room smelled like old paper and wood. I noticed an open book on a table. Its pages had sketches of the manor in elegant handwriting. I leaned closer to read. The spirits of the hollow seek solace. They linger, waiting for a kind heart to set them free. I felt a strange connection to the words. Then I heard a soft whisper. I turned around, but the room was empty. Suddenly a loud crash came from upstairs. My heart raced. "Guys," I called out, but no one answered. I hurried out of the library, my heart pounding as I climbed the stairs. As I reached the second floor, the whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a cold wind. Shadows danced in the dim light. The whispers seemed to call me down a hallway, leading me to a door at the end. I pushed it open and found a bedroom frozen in time. Dust covered the old furniture, and a faded quilt lay on the bed. My heart raced when I saw her, a pale figure by the window looking out into the night. "Who are you?" I whispered, barely able to speak. The figure turned slowly, her hollow eyes staring deep into mine. "I am Eleanor," she said in a soft, haunting voice. "I lived here trapped by my family's sorrow. I can't find peace." "What can I do to help you?" I asked, feeling a mix of fear and empathy. She glanced at the door. You must find my locket. It holds my memories and my freedom. It's hidden in the cellar, but the shadows protect it fiercely. As she spoke, the whispers turned frantic, filling the room with urgency. I knew I had to act fast. I'll find it, I promised, determined to help her. I hurried out of the room, the whispers guiding me to the staircase leading down to the cellar. Each step felt heavier, and the air felt thick with anticipation. The cellar door creaked open, revealing darkness. I flicked on my flashlight and went down the narrow stairs, the light barely reaching the damp walls. Inside, I looked around at the old crates and cobwebs. The whispers faded to a low hum, and a chill ran over me. Suddenly, I saw a dark shape move in the corner of my eye, and I turned just in time to see a figure dart behind some crates. Who's there? I shouted, fear gripping me. No answer came. I knew I wasn't alone. As I searched, I felt the weight of unseen eyes on me. I stumbled upon an old trunk with its lid slightly open. Kneeling down, I peeked inside. There, among the old clothes, was a small locket glinting in the dim light. My heart leaped. I reached for it, but as my fingers touched it, a cold wind swept through the cellar, slamming the trunk shut. Leave! A voice thundered, echoing around me. The shadows around me thickened, swirling like a storm. I could feel the spirits trying to stop me. No, I won't leave without it, I shouted defiantly, my heart racing. The whispers turned into angry shouts, demanding I go. I felt scared but couldn't abandon Eleanor. I took a deep breath, grabbed the locket, and held it tight. Eleanor, I called out, hoping she could hear me. I have it. I'm coming back. As I rushed up the stairs, the shadows lunged at me, cold fingers brushing my skin. I could feel their anger, but I didn't stop, driven by the need to help Eleanor. I burst into the bedroom and saw Eleanor still there, hope mixed with desperation on her face. I held out the locket, my heart racing. I found it. This is yours. The moment I showed it to her, the shadows pulled back, and a bright light surrounded Eleanor. Her features softened, and she smiled gently. Thank you, she whispered, her voice now warm and full of gratitude. You freed me. The light enveloped her, and for a moment I glimpsed the happy memories of her life, laughter and love. Then, just as quickly, the light faded, and Eleanor was gone. The heavy feeling in the room lifted, and the whispers quieted to silence. I stood there, overwhelmed with relief. I had faced my fears and helped a lost spirit find peace. My friends finally found me, wide-eyed and breathless. What happened? We heard all those noises, Jenna exclaimed. I found Eleanor, I said, still in shock. She was trapped here, but I set her free. As we left the manor, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The stories about Black Hollow Manor were no longer just tales. They were real, and I was part of its history. Halloween would always be special to me, reminding me of the night I confronted my fears and helped a lost soul find peace. Every Halloween, my family loved carving pumpkins. It was a fun time filled with laughter and a bit of spooky excitement. But one year, everything changed when we heard about a cursed pumpkin that brought bad luck to anyone who carved it. One chilly October evening, my younger brother Timmy and I decided to visit the local pumpkin patch. While we were there, we overheard the owner telling ghost stories to some customers. One story really caught my attention. It was about a cursed pumpkin that had shown up every Halloween for over 100 years. According to the legend, a farmer had carved a beautiful pumpkin long ago, but he accidentally unleashed a curse. This pumpkin was said to bring bad luck, sickness, and even death to anyone who dared to carve it. I felt chills, but I was also curious. I had to find this cursed pumpkin. After searching for hours, I finally spotted a lonely pumpkin at the far end of the patch. It looked different from the others, gnarled with deep grooves and a creepy vibe. As I walked toward it, I felt a chill and a strong urge to touch it. Timmy, sensing my hesitation, begged me not to. Come on, it's just a pumpkin. Let's find a good one and go home, he said nervously. But I was determined. Ignoring him, I reached out and ran my fingers over its rough surface. A cold breeze rushed through the patch, making me shiver. It felt almost alive, responding to my touch. We have to take it home, I insisted, and Timmy reluctantly agreed. We loaded the pumpkin into the car, not knowing what chaos would follow. That night, we sat at the kitchen table to carve it. My hands shook with excitement, but as I cut into the pumpkin, a strange feeling washed over me. The air grew thick, and shadows seemed to dance on the walls. Just as I finished carving a scary grin, the lights flickered. "Did you see that?" Timmy asked, his eyes wide with fear. "Maybe we shouldn't have carved it." "Relax, it's just a power surge," I told him, but my stomach felt uneasy. We lit a candle and placed it inside the pumpkin, setting it on the porch. Its eerie glow lit up the night, and we stepped back to admire our work. But then strange things started happening. The next morning, our cat Whiskers was missing. My parents argued about money, which they never did. As the days went by, more bad luck struck. Timmy tripped and broke his arm. I failed an important test, and my mom got a nasty cold. The curse seemed to be affecting our lives, and panic set in. Desperate to break the curse, I researched the legend more and found a ritual that could help. It said we had to return the pumpkin to where we found it and perform a cleansing ceremony under the full moon. That Halloween night, under a bright full moon, Timmy and I went back to the pumpkin patch. The air was tense as we approached the spot where we found the cursed pumpkin. With dread in my heart, I set the pumpkin back on the ground and began the ritual. As I recited the incantation, the wind howled around us, swirling leaves and debris everywhere. I felt the energy shifting, and the pumpkin started to shake violently. Timmy grabbed my arm, scared, but I kept going, determined to break the curse. "By the light of the moon, I return this pumpkin to you. May the curse be lifted and misfortune banished," I shouted, pouring all my energy into my words. Suddenly, the pumpkin cracked open, shining a bright light that lit up the whole patch. Shadows twisted around us as the wind howled. I felt the curse lift, replaced by a sense of peace. The light surrounded us and everything went quiet in an instant. When the light faded, the pumpkin was gone, and all that remained was a small glowing seed. Timmy and I looked at each other in surprise. Had we really broken the curse? We hurried home and everything felt normal again. Whiskers was waiting at the door, and my parents were laughing in the kitchen. Relief washed over me as I realized we had freed ourselves from the bad luck that had haunted us. From that Halloween on, we never carved pumpkins again. Instead, we decorated our home with cheerful, uncarved ones. The legend of the cursed pumpkin taught us to respect the unknown. And every time I felt the glowing seed in my pocket, I remembered that Halloween night and the power of legends that connect us to the past. It was supposed to be a fun getaway, a weekend in a cabin deep in Willow Creek. My friends and I rented it to escape our busy lives. We thought this Halloween would be relaxing, but it turned into a nightmare we would never forget. When we arrived at the cabin, I felt uneasy. The trees looked dark and creepy, like they were watching us. The cabin itself was charming but strange, with its creaky wood and dark corners. After settling in, we lit a fire and told ghost stories, laughing at our fears. But when night came, the mood changed. The wind howled outside and shadows danced on the walls. We decided to play truth or dare to lighten things up. When it was my turn, I picked truth, expecting a silly question. But Jenna, with a playful look in her eyes, asked, "What's the scariest thing that ever happened to you?" I hesitated, memories rushing back. When I was a kid, I thought I saw a ghost in my house. It was just a shadow, but it felt real. As I spoke, the lights flickered. Our laughter faded, replaced by an uneasy silence. We tried to shrug it off, but the cold air felt heavy. Later that night, I woke up to a soft whisper. "Help me." My heart raced. I sat up and listened. It was faint but persistent. I looked at my friends, all asleep, their faces lit by the flickering candlelight. I felt an urge to check it out. I tiptoed down the creaky stairs, the floorboards groaning under my weight. When I reached the living room, I saw a shadow move past the window. I held my breath and stepped closer. I peered outside, but all I saw was the dark woods. Just as I turned to go back, I noticed an old dusty book on the table. Its leather cover was cracked, and it seemed to call to me. I picked it up and opened it. The pages were filled with sketches of the cabin and notes about rituals and spirits. A chill ran down my spine as I read about the tragic history of Willow Creek Cabin, how a family had vanished without a trace, and their spirits were said to haunt the woods. The whispering got louder, echoing in my ears. Help me. Now it was urgent. My heart raced as I realized I might be facing something supernatural. I rushed to wake my friends, telling them we needed to leave. "Guys, I think we should go," I said, panic creeping into my voice. But they just groaned and told me I was overreacting. After a bit of convincing, they joined me in the living room. I showed them the book and its creepy stories. Jenna rolled her eyes, but Mike looked curious. Let's have some fun. What if we try one of these rituals? Feeling uneasy but curious, we agreed to try a simple one from the book to communicate with the spirits. We set up candles and formed a circle, chanting the words. As I finished the last word, a strong wind blew through the cabin, snuffing out the candles. We panicked and scrambled for matches to relight them. The air thickened with tension, and the whispering turned into frantic voices crying out for help. Get out! Leave this place! Suddenly, the front door flew open, and the wind howled, carrying the voices with it. I felt cold presence behind me. I turned and saw a shadowy figure of a woman, her eyes hollow and pleading. Help me, she whispered, reaching out to us. My heart raced, and I instinctively took a step back. What do you want? I asked, my voice shaking. Free me, she begged, her voice now barely a whisper. You must finish what was started. Confused and scared, we exchanged worried glances. It was clear we had awakened something we weren't ready to face. In a moment of clarity, I remembered the story about the family in the book, how they had been cursed for disturbing the land. We need to break the curse, I said, my voice steadier now. We have to do the final ritual. Without hesitation, we followed the book's instructions, gathering items from the cabin, an old piece of furniture, a family photo, and a small trinket that belonged to the woman. As we placed them in a circle, the whispers grew louder, urging us on. With a final chant, we called the spirit's name, and the air buzzed with energy. The shadowy figure appeared again, a mix of sadness and hope on her face. Thank you, she whispered as a bright light filled the room. When the light faded, the cabin felt lighter, and the heavy atmosphere was gone. The whispering stopped, replaced by a peaceful silence. We stood in shock, realizing we had freed the trapped spirit. As dawn broke, we left the cabin, changed forever by the experience. Willow Creek Cabin was no longer a place of fear. It was a reminder of the importance of compassion and respecting the stories of the past. Every Halloween, my friends and I threw a huge party that turned our quiet neighborhood into a lively celebration filled with costumes and laughter. This year, we really went all out. We rented a popular local venue and invited everyone we knew. The excitement was in the air, and I couldn't wait for the fun to start. As the sun set, the venue came alive with decorations, twinkling lights, and spooky music. People showed up in amazing costumes, witches, vampires, and more, trying to outdo each other. I felt the thrill of the night as I mingled with everyone and soaked up the festive atmosphere. But as the night went on, I noticed a figure lurking in the shadows. He was a tall man wearing a fancy, intricately designed mask. He blended into the crowd, but his dark clothes and mysterious vibe set him apart. I was curious, but also felt a chill run down my spine. He watched the party unfold, a strange presence among all the fun. It was unsettling yet fascinating, like something out of a movie. I told my friends about him, but they just laughed it off as my overactive imagination. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow connected to the night. Later, while I was in the restroom, I heard a loud commotion outside. When I stepped out, I saw people huddled together, whispering in fear. Did you see him? One girl gasped. The masked guy just vanished. My heart raced as I tried to figure out what was happening. What do you mean? He was just here, and then he was gone, like he never existed, she exclaimed, her eyes wide with fear. Intrigued, I searched the venue for the mysterious man, but the more I looked, the more I realized he had disappeared completely. It was like he had never been there, and soon everyone was feeling uneasy. Determined to find out what was going on, I stepped outside into the cool night air. The venue was surrounded by a thick forest, and the moonlight cast eerie shadows through the trees. I felt drawn into the darkness, hoping to catch a glimpse of the masked stranger. As I wandered deeper into the woods, I heard a rustling behind me. I turned, expecting to see one of my friends, but instead, I found myself staring at the masked man. My heart raced as he stepped closer, the moonlight revealing the beautiful details of his mask, which had delicate patterns that seemed to dance as he moved. Who are you? I whispered, my voice shaking. He didn't answer, but extended a gloved hand toward me, inviting me to come closer. Despite my fear, curiosity took over, and I stepped forward. Suddenly, the air changed. I felt a strange connection forming between us, as if he could see my deepest fears and desires. I struggled to look away, but I felt trapped in his gaze. "What do you want?" I finally managed to ask, my heart pounding. "Come with me," he said, his voice low and haunting. "There are secrets in this forest you haven't discovered yet." Without thinking, I followed him deeper into the woods. The darkness wrapped around us, and the laughter from the party faded away. As we walked, my unease began to creep back in. The trees whispered around us, and shadows flickered at the edges of my vision. Eventually, we reached a clearing lit by moonlight. In the center stood an old stone altar, covered in candles and strange symbols. It felt like a sacred place, filled with energy, and I was overwhelmed by its presence. Every Halloween, the kids in the neighborhood whispered about the old Anderson house. It sat at the end of our street, shrouded in shadows, with cracked windows and a creaky porch that seemed to tell stories of the past. For years, it stayed untouched, a relic no one dared to approach. But this year was different. Fueled by our bravery and the Halloween spirit, we decided to explore the infamous house. As dusk settled in, we gathered outside, our breaths visible in the cool autumn air. We each wore our scariest costumes, ghosts, zombies, and witches, hiding our nerves behind layers of makeup and fabric. "Let's make a pact," Ryan said. "We go in together, and if we hear anything spooky, we leave. Deal?" With that, we opened the rusted gate and stepped into the overgrown yard. The air smelled thick with damp earth and decay. We climbed the steps, and the wooden boards creaked beneath our weight. Inside, the house was dark and stale. We switched on our flashlights, their beams cutting through the gloom. Dust motes danced like tiny spirits as we moved deeper into the house. "Look at this place," Sarah exclaimed, shining her light on an old grandfather clock stuck at midnight. We explored room after room, finding old furniture covered in white sheets that looked like ghostly figures. Laughter filled the halls, mixing with the creaks of the house as we joked about how eerie it felt. But soon, the laughter faded when we heard something, a soft whisper echoing through the corridors. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my heart racing. "It's just the wind," Ryan said, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. We pressed on, reaching the kitchen, where a cracked mirror hung crookedly on the wall. As I stepped closer, I caught a glimpse of something behind me, a fleeting shadow that vanished before I could turn around. I spun, but there was nothing there. "This is getting creepy," I murmured. Suddenly, a loud crash came from upstairs. Fear shot through us as we exchanged terrified glances. "We should go," Sarah urged, but curiosity pulled me toward the staircase. "Just one more look," I insisted, and my friends reluctantly followed me up the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, and the air grew colder. The hallway was dark, and the shadows seemed alive. A door at the end was slightly open, with a faint light spilling from the crack. "That's where the noise came from," I whispered, and we approached carefully. As we reached the door, I felt a chill run down my spine. I pushed it open and saw a small room filled with old toys, dolls, and a rocking chair that swayed gently, even though the air was still. "This is creepy," Ryan whispered, stepping back, and then I saw it. A doll with a cracked porcelain face and empty eyes, its mouth moving silently like it was trying to speak. "What the?" I muttered, frozen in place. Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind us, plunging us into darkness. Panic set in as we fumbled for our flashlights. "Let us out!" Sarah screamed, pounding on the door. The room grew colder, and whispers began to rise. "Help us! Find us!" echoed in our ears like a chorus of ghostly voices. I turned to my friends, fear written all over their faces. "We have to find a way out!" I shouted, but the shadows closed in and the whispers grew louder. Then, just like that, everything went silent. The door creaked open, and we stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for breath. "Run!" I yelled, and we raced down the stairs, our hearts pounding. We burst through the front door and tumbled onto the porch, then onto the grass outside. The moonlight lit up the night as we ran back down the street, not daring to look back until we reached the safety of our neighborhood. Once we caught our breath, we exchanged wild stories of what we'd seen, even though we all knew we had experienced something we couldn't fully understand. From that night on, the old Anderson house remained a shadow on the street, a reminder that some places hold secrets best left alone. My part-time job at the local graveyard was just a way to make some extra money. I never thought much about it until Halloween was coming up. That night, I had the graveyard shift, taking care of the grounds and getting everything ready for the remembrance ceremony. As the sun set, a thick fog rolled in, covering the graveyard in a heavy blanket. I set up my lantern and began my rounds, the light flickering against the tombstones. Shadows danced around me, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Halfway through my shift, I heard some rustling nearby. My heart raced as I turned to see what it was, but it was just a raccoon digging through the fallen leaves. I chuckled nervously to myself, trying to shake the feeling that someone was watching me. As I walked deeper into the graveyard, I noticed an old headstone I hadn't seen before. It was cracked and weathered, with a name that was hard to read, Isabella Hawthorne. Below her name was the date of her death, October 31st, 1903. Curiosity got the better of me, and I knelt beside the grave. As I traced the letters with my finger, a chill ran through the air. Suddenly I heard soft whispers, like distant conversations carried by the breeze. I looked around, but the graveyard was quiet. Trying to shake off the unease, I continued my patrol. That's when I saw a figure standing at the edge of the fog, partly hidden. My breath caught in my throat as I squinted to see better. It looked like a woman in a flowing dress, her hair dark and cascading down her back. "Isabella?" I called out, half joking. "Are you here to haunt me?" To my shock, the figure turned and stepped closer. "Help me," she whispered, her voice haunting and sending chills down my spine. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back as my lantern flickered wildly. "What do you want?" I shouted, my heart racing. "Free me," she begged, her eyes full of sadness. "I'm trapped between worlds." The air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder. My instinct screamed at me to run, but I felt frozen in place. "How do I help you?" I asked, trembling. "The truth lies within the earth," she said, pointing to her grave. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed a nearby spade and started to dig. The ground was surprisingly soft, and soon I uncovered a small, weathered box. It was locked but felt warm in my hands. "Isabella, what's in here?" I asked as I kept digging. "Memories, they bind me," she replied, her form flickering like a candle. As I pried open the box, I was flooded with visions, snapshots of Isabella's life, both happy and sad. I saw her laughing with friends and then standing alone, heartbroken. Suddenly, the whispers stopped and the fog began to lift. Isabella's figure shone brighter, her sadness fading. "Thank you," she said, her voice echoing in my mind. With that, she disappeared, leaving only a soft glow behind. The air felt lighter, and a deep peace settled over the graveyard. I closed the box, filled with respect, knowing I had freed her spirit. As I finished my shift, I felt a warm presence around me, like a gentle thank you carried by the wind. From that Halloween night on, the graveyard felt different, alive with stories and spirits at rest, reminding me that some tales are meant to be discovered. One Halloween, I found a dusty book at a garage sale called The Secrets of the Occult. My curiosity got the best of me, and I bought it for just $1, not knowing the dangers inside. That night, I sat in my room with the candlelight flickering around me. The pages were filled with spells and rituals, and I felt a thrill. But a warning echoed in my mind. Some secrets are not meant to be uncovered. Ignoring my instinct, I read a spell for summoning spirits, thinking it would be a fun Halloween prank. As I spoke the words, the air grew heavy, and shadows twisted around me. Suddenly, the candle went out, plunging my room into darkness. A cold gust of wind blew through the window, and I felt something behind me. "What have you done?" a voice hissed, making my skin crawl. Panicking, I reached for my phone, but it flickered and died. I turned around, my heart racing, and saw a figure cloaked in darkness, with glowing eyes like embers. "You've summoned me, child," it said, grinning wickedly. "Who are you?" I stammered, backing away. "I am a spirit bound by the spell you dared to read," it replied, stepping closer. "You've awakened a force beyond your understanding." Desperation filled me. "I didn't mean to. Please, I just wanted to have some fun." The spirit laughed, a chilling sound that echoed in my bones. "Fun has its price. You must pay for your curiosity." I looked around for something to defend myself. "What do you want?" I cried. "Your fear," it said, reaching out with a skeletal hand. "Feel it, embrace it. Only then can I be free." In that moment, adrenaline surged through me. I refused to let it take me. I closed my eyes, focusing on the words I had read. I banish you! I shouted, my voice rising against the darkness. The spirit's laughter faltered, and I felt a wave of strength wash over me. You think you can control what you don't understand? It hissed. I can control my fear, I shouted, summoning all my courage. The warmth of the candlelight returned, lighting up the room and pushing back the shadows. The spirit shrieked, its form flickering. No, you cannot resist! But I stood my ground, and with one final shout, I recited the incantation backward, reversing the spell. The spirit howled, its form fading away, leaving only a whisper of smoke. Breathless and trembling, I fell to the floor, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. I had faced my fear and won, but I promised myself never to mess with the unknown again. From that Halloween on, I kept the book hidden away, a reminder of the thin line between curiosity and danger. Every Halloween, our town held a ghost tour at Willow Creek, an old estate that had been abandoned for years. People said that the original owner, a lonely widow named Eleanor, had vanished without a trace. This year, my friends and I decided to join the tour, excited for a spooky adventure. As we gathered outside the creaking gates, I could feel the anticipation in the air. Our guide, a local historian, told us stories about strange things that had happened there, disembodied voices, flickering lights, and ghostly figures. Eleanor never left, he said, shivering a little. Her spirit lingers in these halls. The doors creaked open, revealing a grand but worn-down foyer. Dust floated in the beams of our flashlights, and an eerie silence surrounded us. We started exploring, moving from room to room, each filled with pieces of the past. In one room, I saw an old piano covered in dust. As I got closer, I noticed the keys were surprisingly clean, like someone had played there recently. Curious, I sat down and pressed a key. A haunting melody filled the room and echoed through the halls. My friends gasped, their eyes wide with fear. Stop! You're awakening her! Shouted Jenna, pulling me away from the piano. The air felt colder, and I sensed a heavy presence above us. Suddenly the lights flickered, and a ghostly figure appeared at the end of the hallway. It was a translucent woman in a flowing white gown. Her eyes were hollow, and her mouth moved silently, as if she were trying to say something. Panic filled us, and we dashed toward the exit. As we ran, I glanced back and locked eyes with her. In that quick moment, I felt a deep sadness coming from her, like she was yearning for something lost. We burst through the front door and into the cool night air, our hearts racing. What was that? I panted, still shaking. I don't know, but I never want to go back, Jenna replied, her voice trembling. Even though we left the estate, Eleanor's presence stayed with us long after. That Halloween, we learned that some spirits hold on to their stories, waiting for someone to listen. Every Halloween, our town held a ghost tour at Willow Creek, an old estate that had been abandoned for decades. There were rumors that the original owner, a reclusive widow named Eleanor, had vanished mysteriously. Her disappearance became a local legend, and many believed her spirit still lingered in the crumbling halls. This year, my friends and I decided to join the tour, excited for some thrills and ready with our flashlights. As we gathered outside the creaking gates, I could feel the excitement in the air. Our guide, Mr. Jenkins, a local historian, shared spooky stories about strange events, disembodied voices, flickering lights, and ghostly figures. Eleanor never left, he said, his voice low and shivery. Her spirit lingers here, longing for connection. When the doors creaked open, we stepped into a grand but decaying foyer. Dust floated in the beams of our flashlights, and a strange silence surrounded us. We started exploring, moving from room to room, each filled with reminders of the past, tattered curtains, broken furniture, and peeling wallpaper. The air felt electric, charged with history and untold stories. In one room, I spotted an old piano covered in dust. As I got closer, I saw that the keys were surprisingly clean, as if someone had played it recently. Intrigued, I sat down and pressed a key. A haunting melody filled the air, echoing through the halls. My friends gasped, their eyes wide with fear, but I felt drawn to keep playing. Stop! You're waking her up! Jenna shouted, pulling me away from the piano. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and I felt an unsettling presence hovering over us. The temperature dropped, sending chills down my spine. I looked around, trying to find the source of the feeling, but all I could see was darkness. Then the lights flickered, and a ghostly figure appeared at the end of the hallway, a translucent woman in a flowing white gown. Her eyes were hollow, and her mouth moved silently as if she was trying to speak. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying, and I could hardly breathe as she approached. Panic surged through us, and we bolted for the exit, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the empty halls. As we ran, I glanced back and met her gaze. In that brief moment, I felt an overwhelming sadness from her, as if she were longing for something lost, a connection to the living. Bursting through the front door, we stumbled into the cool night air, our hearts racing. What was that? I panted, still shaking. I don't know, but I never want to go back, Jenna replied, her voice trembling. Even though we escaped the estate, Eleanor's presence stayed with us long after that night. We couldn't shake the feeling that we had disturbed something sacred. As the years passed, we often talked about that Halloween, and I realized that some spirits hold on to their stories, waiting for someone to listen. I promised myself that I would return to Willow Creek, not as a ghost hunter, but as a seeker of stories, hoping to learn more about Eleanor and the life she once lived. My job at the local graveyard was part-time, just a way to earn some extra cash for Halloween treats. I never thought much about it until Halloween approached. That night, I was assigned the graveyard shift, taking care of the grounds and making sure everything was ready for the upcoming remembrance ceremony. As the sun set, a heavy fog rolled in, wrapping the graveyard in a thick mist. I set up my lantern and started my rounds, the light flickering against the tombstones. Shadows danced around me, and I felt a shiver run down my spine, as if someone was watching me. Halfway through my shift, I heard a rustling sound nearby. My heart raced as I turned to see what it was, but it was just a raccoon rummaging through the fallen leaves. I chuckled nervously, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched, but deep down, I knew something was off. As I walked deeper into the graveyard, I noticed an old headstone I hadn't seen before. It was cracked and weathered, with a name barely readable, Isabella Hawthorne. Below her name was the date of her death, October 31st, 1903. Curiosity got the better of me, and I knelt beside the grave. As I traced the letters with my finger, a chill swept through the air. Suddenly, I heard soft whispers like a breeze carrying distant conversations. I looked around, but the graveyard was still, the only sound the rustling leaves. Trying to shake off my unease, I continued my patrol. That's when I saw a figure standing at the edge of the fog, mostly hidden. My breath caught in my throat as I squinted to see better. It looked like a woman in a flowing dress, her hair falling around her like a dark waterfall. "Isabella?" I called out, half joking but feeling a flutter of panic in my chest. "Are you here to haunt me?" To my shock, the figure turned and took a step forward. "Help me," she whispered, her voice haunting and sending shivers down my spine. Panic surged through me as I stumbled back, my lantern flickering wildly. "What do you want?" I shouted, my heart racing. "Free me," she pleaded, her eyes filled with sadness. "I'm trapped between worlds." The air grew heavy and the whispers got louder. My instincts screamed at me to run, but something held me in place. "How do I help you?" I asked, trembling, feeling her sadness weighing on me. "The truth lies within the earth," she said, pointing toward her grave. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed a nearby spade and began to dig. The ground was surprisingly soft, and soon I uncovered a small, weathered box. It was locked, but felt warm in my hands. "Isabella, what's in here?" I asked, still digging. "Memories, they bind me," she said, her form flickering in and out of view. As I pried open the box, I was overwhelmed by visions, fragments of Isabella's life, filled with moments of joy and sorrow. I saw her laughing with friends, then standing alone, heartbroken. The box held letters, photographs, and a delicate locket with a picture of a man. I realized these were memories she couldn't let go of, her spirit trapped by her past. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, and the fog began to lift. Isabella's figure glowed brighter, her sadness fading. "Thank you," she said, her voice echoing in my mind. With that, she vanished, leaving only a soft glow behind. The air felt lighter, and I sensed a profound peace settling over the graveyard. I closed the box, feeling a deep respect for what I had done. I knew I had set her spirit free. As I finished my shift, warmth surrounded me, like a whisper of gratitude carried on the wind. From that Halloween night on, the graveyard felt different, alive with stories and spirits at rest. A reminder that some tales are meant to be uncovered, even if they are cloaked in sadness. As a kid, I was always fascinated by old legends, especially the ones about the supernatural. One Halloween, I found a dusty book at a garage sale called The Secrets of the Occult. My curiosity got the best of me, and I bought it for $1, not knowing the dangers hidden in its yellowed pages. That night, I sat in my room, candlelight flickering around me as I flipped through the book. The pages were filled with spells and rituals, secrets just waiting to be uncovered. I felt a thrill run through me, but a warning echoed in my mind. Some secrets are not meant to be uncovered. Ignoring that voice, I read aloud a spell for summoning spirits, thinking it would be a fun Halloween prank. As I spoke the incantation, the air grew heavy, and shadows twisted around me. Unease settled in my stomach. Suddenly, the candle went out, plunging my room into darkness. A cold gust of wind blew through the window, and I felt something behind me. "What have you done?" a voice hissed, sending chills down my spine. Panicking, I reached for my phone, but it flickered and died. My heart raced as I turned around and saw a figure cloaked in darkness, with eyes glowing like embers. "You've summoned me, child," it said, a sinister grin spreading across its face. "Who are you?" I stammered, backing away, my heart pounding in my chest. "I am a spirit bound by the spell you dared to read," it replied, stepping closer. "You've awakened a force beyond your understanding." Desperation flooded me. "I didn't mean to. Please, I just wanted to have some fun." The spirit laughed, a chilling sound that echoed in my bones. "Fun has its price. You must pay for your curiosity." I looked around for anything I could use to defend myself. "What do you want?" I cried. "Your fear," it said, reaching out with a skeletal hand. "Feel it, embrace it. Only then can I be free." In that moment, adrenaline surged through me. I refused to let it take me. It was a chilly Halloween night when I decided to stay up late, hoping to see something supernatural. My friends had been sharing ghost stories, and I was eager to have my own spooky experience. Armed with just a flashlight and an old blanket, I settled into my living room, the clock ticking toward midnight. As the hour approached, I felt a strange chill in the air, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer. I could hear the wind howling outside, rattling the windows, but my determination to witness something otherworldly kept me in place. Just as the clock struck 12, a loud thud echoed from the basement, making me jump. "Okay, just my imagination," I told myself, but curiosity gnawed at me. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the basement door, the old wood creaking under my weight. As I went down the stairs, the darkness wrapped around me, and a feeling of dread washed over me. When I reached the bottom, I found the source of the noise, a fallen box of old toys. I chuckled nervously, thinking it was just the wind. But as I turned to leave, I felt a cold breath on my neck, sending shivers down my spine. "Hello?" I whispered, trying to sound brave. No answer, just the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I quickly turned to bolt up the stairs, but a shadow darted across the wall, freezing me in place. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaking. Suddenly, a soft giggle echoed around me. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, revealing a small girl with long hair, dressed in a white nightgown. She looked ethereal, her eyes wide and innocent. "Are you lost?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded, a sad smile creeping across her face. "I just want to go home." A wave of compassion washed over me, but the eerie atmosphere made my stomach twist. "Where is your home?" I asked, edging closer to stay calm. "The place where I used to play," she replied softly, pointing to a corner of the basement. I followed her gaze and saw a dusty old rocking horse, its paint chipped and faded. Memories flooded back of stories my grandmother told me about a little girl who had lived in our house and disappeared one Halloween night many years ago. Realizing who she was, I felt a pang of sorrow. "You can't stay here. You need to move on," I said gently. The girl's expression shifted from sadness to determination. "Will you help me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. With my heart racing, I nodded. "Yes, how?" "Take me to the tree," she whispered, her form starting to fade. I knew about the old oak tree in the yard, rumored to be the last place she had played before she disappeared. Okay, let's go. As I led her back up the stairs, the air grew lighter and the tension eased. We stepped outside into the moonlight, and she pointed toward the tree, her eyes shining. There! We reached the old oak, and I placed my hand on the rough bark. What do you want me to do? I asked, my voice trembling. Let me go, she whispered, tears shining in her eyes. I took a deep breath, feeling both scared and determined. You can be free now. As I spoke, a gust of wind rushed through the branches, swirling leaves around us. The girl smiled, her form becoming more transparent. Thank you, she said, her voice fading into the wind. And just like that, she was gone. The air felt different now, lighter, warmer. I stood beneath the old oak, feeling a deep sense of peace wash over me, knowing I had helped a lost soul find her way home. When my aunt gave me an antique porcelain doll for Halloween, I pretended to be excited, but inside, I was scared. I had always been afraid of dolls. There was something about their lifeless eyes and painted smiles that creeped me out. But Aunt Clara insisted it would bring me luck, so I reluctantly accepted the gift and put the doll on my dresser. That night, as I started to fall asleep, I woke up to soft giggles. I opened my eyes to see the doll facing me, even though I had placed it against the wall. My heart raced, and I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. The next nights were the same. Every morning, the doll was in a different spot. Sometimes it was on my bed, other times it sat at my desk, staring blankly ahead. Maybe I'm just losing it, I whispered to myself, but each time I noticed the doll's movements, a chill crawled up my spine. One night, I woke up to find the doll sitting at the foot of my bed, its glassy eyes locked onto mine. Who are you? I whispered, fear tightening my throat. The room felt cold, and a breeze swept through, carrying a faint whisper. Help me. Shivers ran down my back, and I knew I had to figure out what was going on. The next day, I researched the doll and discovered a sad story about its previous owner, a girl named Lila who had gone missing decades ago. The legend said that Lila's spirit was trapped in the doll, waiting for someone to help her. Determined to assist, I set out to find Lila's resting place. I followed the clues I had gathered and finally arrived at a local park where Lila had last been seen. Standing under an old oak tree, I took a deep breath and held the doll tightly. Lila, if you can hear me, I'm sorry, I whispered. I want to help you find peace. As I spoke, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves. Suddenly, the doll began to shimmer, and a warm energy wrapped around me. Thank you, a voice echoed in my mind, and I could almost see Lila's spirit appearing before me, her face filled with gratitude. With shaking hands, I placed the doll on the ground at the base of the tree. You're free now, I said softly. The air filled with a soft glow, and the leaves swirled around me, creating a whirlwind of colors. When the gust died down, I turned to find the doll gone, as if it had vanished into the wind. Though I never saw it again, I felt a deep sense of closure and peace. Lila was finally free, and I had become part of a story much bigger than my own. From that day on, I learned to embrace the mysteries of the past, knowing that sometimes spirits just need a voice to guide them home. Every Halloween, my family would visit my grandmother's old house, which was creaky and full of memories. She often talked about the ghost in the attic, saying it was friendly and just wanted company. Curious, but a bit skeptical, I decided to explore the attic with my cousins one Halloween night. We grabbed flashlights and headed up the stairs, the old wood creaking under our feet. The attic was dark, filled with dust and cobwebs, and I could feel a strange energy in the air, as if something was waiting for us. See, there's nothing here, one cousin laughed. But just then we heard a soft whisper, help me. Our hearts raced, and we exchanged scared looks. Did you hear that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. They nodded, their eyes wide with fear. Driven by curiosity, we moved further into the attic and found an old trunk with its lid slightly open. When I opened it, a cold breeze swept through, sending shivers down my spine. Help me! Find me! The voice called again, clearer this time. Inside the trunk, we found letters and a beautiful music box. I wound it up, and it played a haunting melody that filled the attic. The atmosphere changed, heavy with emotion. Maybe we should read the letters, my cousin suggested. We each took one, and as we read, we learned about a girl named Clara who lived in the house long ago. Her letters talked about her dreams, loneliness, and longing for connection. With every word, we felt Clara's presence grow stronger, her whispers turning into a soft chorus of sighs. "Thank you," she murmured, and we could feel the air thick with gratitude. The attic felt alive, as if the walls were soaking up our empathy. As we finished the last letter, warmth surrounded us, and the whispers faded into a peaceful silence. We could tell that Clara had finally found peace, her spirit released from sadness. When we came down the stairs, we felt changed by the experience. Every Halloween after that, we returned to the attic to light a candle in Clara's honor, making sure her memory would never fade. We learned that some spirits linger not to scare us, but to be remembered, and in remembering them, we help set them free. Every Halloween, our town had a festival to celebrate stories about witches and magic. This year, the big event was a cooking contest where everyone tried to make the best witch's brew. My friend Clara, who wanted to be a chef, was determined to win, so she asked me to help her find ingredients. We started at the local farmer's market, excited to discover some unique items. Clara wanted something that would impress the judges. "We need something that screams Halloween," she said, her eyes shining with ideas. After searching the market, we decided to explore the woods behind Clara's house. We had heard stories about special herbs that only grew in the moonlight and strange mushrooms that could make any potion better. As we walked deeper into the woods, the air turned chilly. The trees loomed over us, their branches twisting in odd shapes against the darkening sky. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" I asked, looking around nervously. "Of course, it's Halloween," Clara replied, brushing off my worries. Soon we found a clearing lit by the full moon. In the middle stood a twisted old tree, its roots reaching out like gnarled fingers. "Look at this," Clara exclaimed, pointing to a group of bright, glowing mushrooms at the base of the tree. Ignoring my unease, we walked closer to the tree. Clara knelt down to pick the mushrooms, excitement written all over her face. Just as she reached for them, a cold wind blew through the clearing, rustling the leaves and making her shiver. "Maybe we should go back," I suggested, but Clara insisted. "We need these for the brew." While she picked the mushrooms, I spotted something strange, a small, shiny cauldron hidden in the tree roots. It sparkled in the moonlight, and a faint mist swirled above it. I wanted to touch it, but Clara grabbed my wrist. "Don't! It might be dangerous," she warned quietly. Still, I felt drawn to it, like I could hear it calling my name. Just one look, I thought, and I leaned closer. The cauldron bubbled gently, changing colors and casting weird shadows on my face. Suddenly, Clara gasped. "Look," she shouted, pointing at the mushrooms. They glowed brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. The air felt heavy, and a wave of heat washed over me. "What's happening?" I asked, panic creeping in. The cauldron erupted with a burst of light, and a figure appeared from the mist, a woman dressed in dark clothing, her eyes glowing brightly. "You have awakened me," she cried, her voice echoing in the woods. Clara stepped back, dropping the mushrooms. "We didn't mean to disturb you," I shouted, fear taking over. "You wanted the magic of the earth," the woman said, her voice smooth and musical. "But magic comes at a price. You must prove you are worthy to use it." With a wave of her hand, the clearing changed. The trees twisted into amazing shapes, and colorful flowers bloomed everywhere, glowing in the moonlight. "What do you want from us?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Create a brew that shows your true intentions," she instructed, her gaze piercing me. "Only then will you understand magic." Clara and I exchanged worried glances, realizing the seriousness of the moment. We pulled ourselves together and started gathering herbs and other ingredients from the clearing. The air buzzed with energy as we worked, guided by the magic around us. We mixed our ingredients in the cauldron, whispering our hopes and dreams into the brew. As we stirred, it shimmered and bubbled, transforming into a colorful, swirling liquid. "Now, taste it," the witch commanded, her eyes focused on us. With shaking hands, Clara and I each took a sip. The flavors exploded in our mouths, sweet, bitter, and spicy, all blending into a unique taste. Suddenly, I saw flashes of visions showing our fears, dreams, and regrets. The witch smiled, her expression softening. "You have proven yourselves. Use this magic wisely, it can create or destroy." Then she vanished into mist, leaving us alone in the clearing, the cauldron now still. We stood in awe, the night air thick with what had just happened. We collected the remaining mushrooms and made our way home, changed forever by our encounter. When the festival came, Clara shared her brew and told the story of the witch and the magic we had met. As the judges tasted her potion, their eyes widened in surprise. Clara won first place that night, but the real victory was the strong bond we formed through the magic of the woods, a bond that would last a lifetime.